Hey there, fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
I'm Arthur.
And we're here talking about fools and tricksters, and today, Unreliable Narrators, because we're in week 2 of our coverage of fools and tricksters for the month of April, over here on the podcast and also on the website at fullybooked.ca, where we've got a bunch of new content being published on a regular basis, so you guys can always head over there to check that out. But today we're kind of keeping in the same vein to a degree, because last week, we were chatting through older sort of like origins of fools and tricksters and things in like folklore and mythology and kind of where they come from, what they maybe represent and things like that, and how we see more modern iterations of them today, because they're still quite prevalent. But also, I think without touching on it too much, we might have covered a little bit of how like things being told from, or stories being told from the trickster's perspective can often be like unreliable, and the narrative becomes unreliable because of that. And it got us kind of thinking about the whole idea of unreliable narrators in literature across the board, and like how popular they've become also, because it's still something that you see very regularly that's used as like a foil in narration to sort of trick the reader into not necessarily being aware of what exactly is happening in the story oftentimes. So we kind of figured that we would just like chat through all of that aspect of things today, unreliable narrators, and kind of how they relate back to the idea of like a trickster character to a degree.
Yeah, exactly. So like what happens when the trickster is the one telling the story, right?
Like the idea, right, that the idea can immediately kind of become, well, how much of this narrative can I believe then when I'm reading it? Like, are they seeing things a different way than what's actually happening? Are they lying or choosing to omit or embellish certain things in order to, get their own story or their own point across? Like, what is real and what is not real in the narrative that you're being presented with when you have a trickster character who's telling the story.
Yeah, exactly. So like, what do you think makes an unreliable narrator or a trickster narrator, right? Because like technically not all unreliable narrators are tricksters.
No, not at all.
Right?
Yeah.
But all tricksters narrators are unreliable.
I would say more often than not.
Exactly.
Because it would be almost impossible to say like with absolute certainty, like, no, they're not at all, because so often they're using whatever they can, including like lies or embellishments of certain aspects of things to get what they want.
Yeah, and wit and misdirection, right? They kind of control over their own story, even if they are telling their own story.
Yeah.
It could still be unreliable because they can just make up anything they want.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Because that's exactly true. Not every narrator is a trickster, and a reliable narrator is a trickster, but all the tricksters who are narrators are definitely embellishing or lying in some capacity.
Exactly.
At some point.
And I guess the beauty of it is that like these types of stories, they often challenge reader assumptions.
Yeah, your perception
right?
of things.
Exactly. That's it. And kind of like they bend or blend the boundaries before between the truth and fiction.
Well, it's what we
essentially.
It's what we talked about with tricksters like last week, right? In the sense that oftentimes we love these types of characters because they bring us into that sort of gray area, like morally gray area that we kind of exist in so many stories now, and they help us to question certain aspects of rules and societal norms, maybe that we, like maybe in some cases that we haven't thought to question on our own before. And I feel like the unreliable narrator aspect of that too adds even more layers, or more of like different shades, I guess, to that gray area in and of itself, because then you're adding another aspect to the narrative that's also, I guess it kind of makes you question your own ideas a little bit more, your own perceptions of certain aspects of like any story like that you're reading, is that, you almost try to go back and you're asking yourself things like, oh, should I have seen this coming, like whatever, maybe like something that's been hidden by the narration or that narrative style specifically. Should I have seen something coming? Was there an indication that maybe there was something like dishonest happening earlier in the book itself? Like, it makes you question things a little bit more. But I think that's also why these are really popular types of stories. Like unreliable narrator stories are very, very big as a rule, particularly in certain genres, like in
Yes.
certain spaces.
For sure. That's
Yeah.
it. So, considering that, those type of stories, they essentially trick you on purpose, right? So is this
Yes.
something that like you enjoy, you like, or do you feel that it's like, god damn it, they fooled me again?
I guess it really depends on the story. Overall, I find I really enjoy when a story surprises me because, it's completely understandable. I think that with how many books and films and stories and things exist now, that it can be difficult sometimes with how many different types of stories exist and twists that have already occurred in multiple different ways across media in general.
Right.
It can be difficult a little bit to surprise an audience, whether it's a reading audience, a watching audience, whatever it is, to a degree. Like, it can be a little bit hard to do that now because people have access to so many different types of stories all the time.
Of course.
So I kind of like, it can be frustrating in some cases when you're reading a book and you're like, are you kidding me? Like when you get to a certain part and you realize that something was withheld from you, or that there was an outright lie that was told by the narrator of the story, whatever it is. But I find it can be more than often than anything else. I find like I'm really impressed when the story does that, because I really like to be like truly surprised by something that I'm reading.
So if you had a choice between a book where, it's an obvious trickster is going to be telling the story or whatever, right? So you'll basically know that this is probably unreliable or embellished. Would you choose that, or the one that like will maybe surprise you somewhere through the story?
I don't know. Oh, that's a hard question because there are such good stories in both of those spheres, both of the ones where you basically purposely know, like, you're being led towards or misled on purpose by the trickster character or the unreliable narrator, whatever it is, or in other cases, that's it. You just really enjoy the one that just manages to truly surprise you anyway, just through use of literary devices.
That's it.
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that.
Okay.
I like both of them.
I like both.
Yeah.
Both are good.
Both is good.
Okay. What's like the last book that you read that had unreliable narrator stuff that you really liked?
There have definitely been others since then, but I think the last one that maybe like the more, I don't know, one of the more recently published ones, I guess, that stuck with me a little bit. It's from a couple of years ago, and I'd actually gotten an ARC of it. It's called The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. And that was a book.
We spoke to her, right?
Yeah, we did.
We had an interview
with her as well for the site. She was really nice to answer a lot of our questions before the book was published, which was really sweet of her. So this book kind of blew up a few years ago when it was published, and I had not read her work prior to this, and this entire book is like a total mindfuck for you. It's a multiple POV book, very much psychological thriller type, and I really don't want to give more away than that, except it's multiple narrators, basically all of whom for different reasons could be unreliable in some capacity. And the only other thing I will say, because it's out there online, you read it, and every single description for this book is that one of the narrators is a cat. So
nice.
I'm not kidding.
That's fun.
So yeah. And I wouldn't want to give people any more pieces of plot of the novel, because it's so surprising when you get through all of it, and it was so well written. And I loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. I think the year that I read it, when I had gotten the copy of the book, I think if I think back to like the podcast from like our top 10 books, I'm pretty sure it was one of my top 5 from the year.
Right. Wow.
It was really good.
Okay. Yeah. Nice. So put it on your TBR, guys.
Yeah, that's it. Just add it to the list. It's really good.
Nice. Okay. I mean, look, so since we're talking about this, what other examples do we have? Right. So I have a couple of examples of I guess a type of, not like fully official types of tricksters or trickster styles, but also the book that come with it.
Yeah.
So for example, there is The Charming Liar, I guess. That's obviously Loki.
Yes,
right?
Of course.
So it is the Gospel of Loki book by Joanne M. Harris, right? So it kind of, the whole purpose of it, or the whole book, is that it tells his side of the Norse myths, right? But because it is him who is telling it,
He tells it in his own favor, of course.
Exactly,
yeah, of
right.
course.
So it's like full of sarcasm, a lot of self-pity, because, Loki. And he's like constantly spinning the narrative of the story and everything. So that's one. Very interesting. The question that came to me with this is that, not just for this book specifically, but just in general. So what like the narrator tells you that they are unreliable, right? Does that make you trust them more? Because they'll be telling half-truths.
Yeah, but it doesn't make me trust them. If anything, then I'm just like thinking that everything that they're telling me is bullshit at that point. Like it's like not necessarily, no.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like if you read...
Would you believe more what they're saying, or would you be like, nah, man, this is...
I feel like it probably causes you to think about it a little bit more, but if I think to certain examples of those types of stories, like I feel like American Psycho's a little bit like that. Like Patrick's basically telling you that he's imagining things, and like he doesn't fully understand it himself, but he kind of like, especially in the narrative and the novel, I found he kind of like explains it to you a little bit from time to time. But it doesn't make you trust the character more, because there is like also still a big part of you being like, oh my God, but he is probably killing people, right?
Yeah.
So it's, you're still like waiting. Like, I don't know. I'm not sure which one is real and which one isn't. So.
Okay. Makes sense. That's fair.
Okay. Do you have any like examples of like, other than Loki? Do you have
I have a bunch.
Of like trickster specific types of unreliable narrators?
So there's like the kind of like the trickster playing dumb type of thing.
Sure.
So that is a book called Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov.
Oh, Vladimir Nabokov. Okay. Yeah.
So the narrator is Charles, and he kind of presents himself as a humble editor, but then he hijacks the poem to tell a delusional and fantastical story about himself.
Wow, okay, Nabokov really liked his unreliable narrators, eh? It's like his most popular work is literally follows an unreliable narrator as the narrator of the story.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, sort of, but yeah.
That's it. Okay, so there's another one. I guess you could classify it under the con artist style narrator type of thing.
Yeah.
So it's The Lies of Locke Lamora.
Oh. Locke Lamora?
Locke Lamora?
Loch?
Locké.
Oh. Locke. Probably Locke. Okay.
That's it. By Scott Lynch. Right? So so it tells like a smooth, confident version of his cons, because he's,
I see.
But it withholds key facts and plays both the character and the reader.
Okay.
So, it's like, oh yeah, I did all these things, but
did I though? Yeah.
Or was it that well done and perfectly executed and stuff?
Was it actually that well executed?
That's it. Yeah. And there's also one that is kind of fun. It's like the satire version of it.
Yeah.
So there's Lamb by Christopher Moore.
Oh yeah, Christopher Moore loves a funny take on something. His books are hilarious. I think I've read like 3 or 4 of them at this point. Yeah. But just like if you want a laugh, they're silly, they're fun, they're like cleverly written, they're very fast paced, so you just kind of like roll with it. But I've read a good few and they make me laugh out loud. Like they're very funny.
There you go. Yeah. So maybe you'll like this one. So essentially the narrator is a childhood friend of Jesus named Biff.
Oh, yes. Okay, so I've read the description of this one, but I have not read it, but I know which one you're talking about.
Okay, right. That's it. So, like, it tells wildly irrelevant versions of the Gospels.
Yeah.
It's, like, full of jokes, sarcasm, and it deliberately skews the facts of kind of, like, what happened and stuff. So that, like, from what you said, sounds like a really fun book.
Yeah, no,
just because of the style of
they definitely are. That's it. Like I think I had mentioned previously too. That's it. Christopher Moore is also the author of a book called Fool, which follows the fool from King Lear, and it's again the entire story is told from his perspective essentially. So it's the events of King Lear that play out, but from the court jester's perspective on everything. And so again, it's one of those like skewed views of things as you're reading it, because you're like, he's only because he doesn't see every interaction, so he gets what's going on, but he also doesn't see everything, and then has his own ideas about stuff as well. And I know it's more presented as like just from his own like what he witnesses and everything, but there is like an element of unreliability to it to a degree as well, which is quite funny.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we actually mentioned that one.
We did. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we talked about it. Yeah.
That's it. Do you have any ones that you found?
Yeah, so I mean, okay, so when I was looking at stuff, I guess on my end of things, like you were really sticking to like the trickster
Yes, that's
style
like the
stuff.
trickster
I guess I was just
part of
like
it.
doing a little more general into the aspects of just unreliable narrators as a whole, because there are many
Of course,
things,
yes.
right? And also they're classified in different ways based on, because I don't think that we think about it. We just say the term, we use the term unreliable narrator, which I believe was coined back in the 60s or so by a literary critic, somewhere around that time, who was describing them basically, you know, as sort of a narrative of a novel can be reliable when it appears to, the narrative itself and the story appears to follow basically the the supposed or proposed author's view on things. So the person writing the book.
Right.
As opposed to like unreliable, in which it's more from a character's perspective or maybe multiple characters' perspectives, and presents conflicting, like a narrative that appears to conflict with almost the way that the author is presenting the story, if that makes sense. Like it's almost like the characters and the author have a different idea of what actually happened.
Right, that's it. Yeah. That's a very interesting style, actually. Probably very hard to write.
Yeah, that's it. So so you have like different, I guess what I kind of love about it is that it's true. Sometimes we forget that there are different types of unreliable narrators, and it's fun to sort of think back about more classic novels, more modern books, all these sorts of things, and the type of unreliable narrator that's used in them. So you've got characters like that are considered, I think they call it basically like a naive narrator. So this is somebody who's like if the novel is told from like a child's perspective.
Oh, okay, I see. Right.
Or
that makes
from
sense.
someone who perhaps has like, you know, something that keeps them very innocent or naive of a particular situation. So maybe they don't see all of the elements of what's taking place throughout the story. So like that's something, I'm trying to think of examples. Oh yeah, okay, so that's something like Atonement by Ian McEwan, which is told from the perspective of, I want to say, like a 12-year-old girl.
Oh wow.
And like Room by Emma Donoghue,
yes, of course.
because Jack, the little boy who's about 6 years old or so in the novel, everything is from his perspective. The entire novel is from his perspective. And even if you've seen like the film version, the beginnings of the film are also from his perspective. So it does create an unreliability because they have a lack of understanding of circumstances that either they are existing in or the characters that they're reporting on are existing in, you know? So it's like that kind of unreliable sort of narrator. Yeah. You've got somebody like an outsider kind of unreliable narrator. So that's someone generally who is like observant of the situation, but is perhaps not directly connected to the characters to whom like these things are happening, so they don't have all of the
so they're
facts.
Like not part of the story.
Yeah, like they could be somebody viewing things from the perspective of like somebody who's just come into town, who's new, or someone who is perhaps of a different socioeconomic status. So like something like in King Lear being told from the perspective of the fool, he doesn't necessarily have all of the facts or all of the knowledge regarding the characters and the family and what's happening with them. Yeah. So that presents like its own, where again, you're like, okay, well, I think you're missing certain aspects of things, but we don't know that because we're reading it from this one person or character's perspective, right? You've got something that, what is it called? A picaro. So basically that type of unreliable narrator is classified
like
as,
a dessert.
Yeah, I know, it does, a piccolo, kind of. It's basically that's classified as the type of unreliable narrator who purposefully embellishes the story. So they like exaggerate aspects of it when they're retelling it. They, you know, embellish certain things. They maybe tell them in a slightly different way than the actual events that took place or whatever, to make things seem more grandiose. Like Loki does shit like that, right? Like more grandiose and stuff like that. That is something like Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, Charlotte wrote Jane Eyre. God, there's 3 of them and I get them confused all the time. So like Wuthering Heights, for instance, is told from the perspective of Nellie, who, if I'm not mistaken, in the novel is like a housemaid.
Right, yeah.
So she's kind of like a bit of a mix of like an outsider because she's not right smack dab in the middle of everything. She's observing it from the outside of the situation, like all the stuff between Catherine and Heathcliff.
Yeah.
But she also has a tendency to exaggerate certain aspects of it. Like she does embellish certain aspects of the narrative throughout the story. So that's something that happens throughout like the course of that
novel. It's a very specific style.
It's a very specific type of one. That one is an unreliable narrator from an outsider's perspective. It's weird.
Yeah.
And then you've got something like, obviously, a character who mentally is unstable in some
Oh,
capacity,
yeah.
that type of unreliable narrator. And
that's
that
true.
one specifically is like, that one I feel like you can almost, I feel as though you can almost extend that to also include things like substance abuse, for instance,
Yep.
right?
Yep. I would include that.
You know, so like your narrator who is like quote unquote insane, let's say, or mentally deficient in some capacity. It's either something along the lines of, you know, someone maybe who's already in the middle of something or slowly losing their mind to a degree. So you've got like your like Shutter Island,
Yes,
and things like that, very unreliable narrator because of that. And then on like, I don't know, the substance abuse side of things, let's say you've got like Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins, which tells the story of, you know, a woman who is sort of desperately just looking for something out of her own sort of mundane, sort of very unhappy life, and watches particular neighbors when she takes the train into the city in the morning. She watches her neighbors who live somewhere in the vicinity of her house, basically, because she can see them from where she sits on the train. She thinks she witnesses like a murder, basically, and all this kind of stuff, and starts like looking into it. However, the character is heavily alcoholic and is like kind of barely functioning at this point.
Okay,
So her narrative can't be trusted to the degree that she herself starts to believe that she's not really seeing what she's seeing.
Right, okay.
And things, because of all of these different sort of aspects of it. And I find those ones, like the slightly unhinged ones who are like dealing with like substance issues or whatever other stuff, you see that in thrillers a lot. That is like a big thing where it's like, oh, but maybe you're popping too many pills or drinking too much or doing this, that, or the other. Like, it's a lot of those sorts of aspects of things.
Yeah, okay, I can see that.
Yeah, and then the last one that I have that I was looking at were obviously just the outright liars. People who just are twisting a story or telling a completely false story throughout the course of a novel. So that's
How would you know that?
Well, because normally what winds
like
up happening...
stories, I guess?
Well, yeah, because normally what winds up happening is that, like, eventually the reader is actually able to put the pieces together because of the way that the narrative takes. So that's like Gone Girl. That's exactly what Gone Girl does.
Okay, sure. Yeah, okay.
Right? Particularly, I will say, like, yeah, you see it in a certain way in the movie, but in the movie, I feel like it's a lot easier to figure out what's going on. When you read the book, because all you're getting are half of the POVs from Nick's perspective as Amy has disappeared and he's trying to understand what's going on. All of the other entries that come in are all her diary entries, but her diary entries are largely false or twisted to create a different image of her husband than the person who he actually is.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's just like that, for me anyway, that's just like your outright liar, like your person who just is like, that person's a liar. That's it.
Yeah,
There's nothing really else to it in that case. But you can also get a mix of like the crazy people and the liar too. I find like those ones overlap a lot. So like Lolita is kind of like that because like Humbert's character is a fucking liar because he lies and says that like Lolita is also in love with him, which is insane because she's 12. But also he's also written all of this down and given it before passing away due to an illness. He's given all of this to a psychiatrist in like a facility that he's in. So obviously he's also lost his grip on reality, you know? And he did a long time before. Anyway, there are like a lot of them that are like that I find kind of they combine multiple ones, but it's interesting.
I think that makes it interesting, maybe even more interesting when you combine several ones.
Exactly.
Right?
Oh, you know what's another really good outsider one, actually, that I didn't think of? A lot of them are classics, I find. I don't know why. Wuthering Heights falls into that category, and I find Rebecca does as well, by Daphne du Maurier, because it's all told from the perspective of the second wife of Maxim de Winter, and she's being brought into a new situation, having just married him and going into this house where all of the staff, all of these people are aware of what happened to his first wife, Rebecca, who's passed away. Yeah. But she doesn't know anything. So she's trying to put the pieces together, but she also interprets things differently because she doesn't have all the facts and she doesn't really know what's going on. So that's like another good one in there. I don't know. There are so many of them.
Of course. That's it. Of course.
I mean, that's it. Last House on Needless Street, like that I just talked about, all of those kind of fall into it too. There are a lot of them, but yeah, it's interesting because we forget oftentimes what we say on Unreliable Narrator, we throw it out. Like we throw out like gaslighting and stuff like that, but like without, I guess, thinking back to or really taking the time to think about all the different aspects of that and all the different types of unreliable narrators that you can have, and that maybe some books that you're reading, it wouldn't occur to you. Like maybe if I were reading Atonement, I wouldn't necessarily be like, I'm reading an unreliable narrator story, but it is told from the perspective of a young girl with her own opinions on things.
Yeah,
so
that's
it's like,
that's it.
yeah, it is, you know.
Those are really fun.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
They're interesting ones. But yeah, it's just like a cool, I don't know, it is a cool literary or narrative device. I find we see it, I do find the mystery and thriller genre get it a ton.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Because it's such
fits really well with it.
It's such a good way to withhold whatever the twist is and things like that until like later in the novel, you know, to like not give too much away to anyone. So that's something that's used over and over again. And I do think that there's a difference between an unreliable narrator, like a narrative, let's say, that utilizes an unreliable narrator. So someone who's either lying or is dealing with mental health issues or substance abuse, or is like doesn't have all the facts because they're not involved directly in what's going on, versus when you're reading a thriller, not everything is immediately an unreliable narrator because there are pieces of the story that haven't been given to you as the reader,
on purpose.
but we're being presented them throughout the course of the story. I don't think that makes it immediately an unreliable narrator story, but I could see how people would kind of just assume that, you know, like what was I reading not too long ago? I read The Boyfriend by Frida McFadden.
Right, yeah.
Because I'd wanted to pick up like just like a quick thriller, and I've never read Frida McFadden before, even though she's like massive now in the thriller space. And I know like The Housemaid's being made into a movie and stuff. It's like a whole thing. So I wanted to pick one up, and anyway, I had decided to read that one, and it that one I find is again multiple POVs, and you're getting flashbacks versus present day kind of thing, and parts of the story are piecing themselves together, but I wouldn't call it an unreliable narrator story. It's just that you're like a lot of information is withheld from you until later in the book, basically, and then is given to you, but it doesn't mean that you have an unreliable narrator, if that makes sense.
That one you wouldn't classify it as such. Okay.
That's it. But I find it would be easy to classify almost everything if that were the case as an unreliable narrator story, but really it's just a mystery because you're not being given all of the facts until towards the end of the novel in order to wrap up the mystery.
Yeah, well, it's a good thing we went through the several possible ways of doing the unreliable narrator, so now you know when to classify it or not.
Yeah, that is correct. It's true.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, I don't know how you feel about it, but I like an unreliable narrator.
No, for sure. No, I love it. It is interesting. I cannot say I've read a lot of them, but some of the one that I did read, it does make it interesting. It's I find it better, like the question that I initially asked you, to probably be surprised by it as opposed to going in knowing it.
Yeah.
Just because it's like, you know, it gives you a different perspective on the book once you know what it is. Yeah. You know, so.
There must be unreliable narrators in sci-fi stuff too, right? I'm sure it happens. That you
for sure.
Up with
I
some of
just
those.
find it.
I don't know. All right. Well, listen, next week we're going to be chatting through one of those unreliable narrator stories specifically, because we're going to be taking a look at an adaptation. So we'll be talking about, I guess, specifically what this falls under category-wise.
Yeah, it's true.
We
need to classify it.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of chatting through all of that. It's been ages since I've watched this, so I'm interested to see how I feel about it now.
Cool.
Yeah.
Excited.
All right. Anyway, in the meantime, you can obviously check out everything we have going on over on the website at fullybooked.ca. You can check out all of our social media. So, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky. Just look for Fully Booked CA and you will find us over there. But until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Ciao, guys.